Right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to this, the second of our Housing Inequality Series sessions. So last week we had really powerful presentations from Tiff Beatty of the National Public Housing Museum and Alejandra Cancino of the City Bureau, and both of them touched heavily on the history of housing inequality in Chicago, and that's been a recurrent issue for us across many adult education programs, the Michigan Avenue Forum, for at least a year or so now. So things like racial covenants and redlining are familiar phrases for us. And Tiff and Alejandra really grounded us in that history, particularly as it pertained to public housing last week. And so now we're going to shift gears and go from the past to the present day. And we're going to learn more about organizations and persons who are doing incredible work to mitigate, to better and improve the housing inequality here in Chicago, and to lead us into a future that is more equitable and provides affordable housing and safe neighborhoods for all of our residents. So I'm excited to give them each an opportunity to introduce themselves and their organizations. And so we will go ahead and start with Teresa Thornburg, director of our own Elam Davies Social Service Center.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Teresa Thornburg. As Joe said, I'm the director of the Elam Davies Social Service Center at Chicago Lights. And I wanted to join this panel and be here today because housing as a social service center is really the number one thing that comes up as a request from our participants. So I want to talk about that to help provide clarification to that to our community and to help kind of understand how we're thinking about it and how we're trying to have a deeper role in doing something about it in a way that preserves our own mission and our own focus on doing something with high quality. So so I'm here today to kind of talk about that, talk about what we're seeing from our participants, what they're bringing to us as their housing challenges, some ways that we have thought about responding to that as a staff and a community, and some ways that we're still trying to figure out how to have a deeper impact in that way. We've been doing a lot of work over the past few years to discern that on a deeper level and figure out, like, what is this giant thing called housing in Chicago? And how do we get our foot in that in a way that has an impact and allows access for our participants of our program. So I'm excited to answer questions about that, talk about that. I don't identify as somebody who specializes in housing, just someone that's taken a dive into trying to figure it out the past few years working here, mainly because it's a request that comes to our doorstep all day, every day, Monday through Friday. So thank you all for being here and for the opportunity to kind of give us a forum to chat about this and to learn more as a community. I'm excited to share. So.
And next we'll have Amy Tosh from the organization United Power, who is their lead organizer. Introduce herself and her organization.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Amy Toch. I'm the lead organizer for United Power for Action and Justice. United Power is a Cook County-wide organization. It's made up of member churches, mosques, synagogues, nonprofits, so religious and civic institutions, what we call the people's institutions, all throughout Cook County. And similar to Teresa, right? My expertise is not necessarily in housing. I'm an organizer. My expertise is in organizing people power to address common social challenges that we see every day in communities throughout Cook County. And so we organize people power through those member organizations to address these challenges in effective ways. So we don't just work in housing, we've also tackled healthcare, public safety, other issues that are very broad, but one of our major efforts that we're working on right now is housing and addressing particularly single-family affordable home ownership in the city of Chicago and throughout Cook County. And I've been organizing for 15 years now. It's easy to remember because it's the same amount of years I've been married, so I can hopefully keep that straight. But I've been organizing for 15 years, came to this work through the congregation that I grew up in, St. Mary's Episcopal Church, which is a founding member of United Power. So happy to be with y'all today. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. And now I want to welcome Jennifer Parks, who's the Executive Director for Habitat for Humanity Chicago, to introduce herself.
Good morning, everybody, and again, thank you for hosting us here and allowing us to be part of this conversation. Many of you may be familiar with Habitat for Humanity. We are a global organization, not only across the United States, but around the world. Our vision is a world in which everyone has a decent place to live, and I'm with the Habitat organization that's here in Chicago specifically. When I think about the housing continuum goes from working with folks who are not housed all the way through folks that are, market rate housing and everywhere in between. And in Habitat, we really focus on affordable home ownership. That is our space, so that we are a practitioner of that work. Here in Chicago, we put that work to a wider lens of neighborhood health, and we'll share a little bit more about that. We think about the importance of our work not only in providing a stable, affordable place to live through home ownership, but also how we think about the broader implications of a healthy neighborhood and how we should be all driving together to make sure that this city is not only the city of Chicago. This city is a great city, but it should be great for everyone. And so how do we make sure that all of our work is focused on healthy neighborhoods? I thank you again for having us here, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Jen. And next, we'll hear from Cheryl Hamilton Hill of the Lincoln Park Community Services Center, their Executive Director. So thank you, Cheryl.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want you to do something for me. I'm going to give you a couple of numbers, 1,619, 206, and 1. And now I want you to do the second thing. Close your eyes for a moment. And I want you to imagine that when you got up this morning, you were not coming to church. You're outside, you're on the ground. Everything that you own is with you. You're going to wake up, you have no idea where you're going to eat or if you're going to eat. You have no idea if you're going to have a shower or what the weather may be. This is something that, you can open your eyes. This is something that we deal with every single day at Lincoln Park Community Services. And as we have a conversation today about what it looks like, we're talking about housing, but for our folks, first you've got to get a house. And there are a lot of things that come before being able to get someone housed. So I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, the daughter of a preacher. So service has always been a part of my life. But a while back, I left my highfalutin job to do nothing but focus on those who are experiencing homelessness. And so we'll talk about that today. Thank you for having me.
Thanks to everybody up here. I'm excited for this conversation. And so what I'd like to do is give each of you an opportunity to dive a little bit more deeply into the work that your organization is doing, and particularly how that work is interfacing with housing inequalities, housing opportunities, and the prospect of creating a more vibrant Chicagoland community in which everybody is housed and has and has safe and great neighborhoods to live in. Teresa, we'll start with you and just tell us a little bit more about the Social Services Center, what you're experiencing, particularly among clients that are seeking housing, and what you're trying to do to mitigate that as well. Sure. You can go up there or down here, whichever you prefer.
Okay, so at the Social Service Center, a little context here. We were really born out of a vision of Fourth Church. So Dr. Elam Davies wanted to do more for the community. He kind of started the Social Service Center. Eventually, we branched into Chicago Lights, and our really main focus was like distribution of clothing, distribution of food. People come to our door. How do we get them the resources that they need? And over the years, what we've seen, of course, is, you know, we hand out the t-shirt and the socks and the underwear, and people are excited. And then they say, where do you have any connection for housing? Do you know where I can go to feel safe? Do you know anywhere on the north side? Because I'm tired of all this criminal activity and where I'm living. And so as we've wrestled with that over the years, because when you hear that 20, 30, 40 times a day, you know, you can't forget it. And at some point, the call becomes greater than clothing and underwear, and it becomes, we've got to try to do something more. So our initial stab at it was to get a housing case manager. So we brought this person in, and what we realized is it's complicated. It's not quite as easy as, you know, maybe we thought maybe like, okay, you don't have a phone, so come in and we'll call with you, or come in and we'll fill out an application and get it submitted with you. What we experienced was, if you have an eviction on your record, that's complicated. If you don't have a good credit score, that's complicated. If you suffer from mental health or any sort of PTSD diagnosis where you have other factors that show up in your presentation, it's complicated. You know, maybe you have a job, but it's minimum wage. So how do you, if your landlord wants you to make, if your rent is $1,000 and you make $2,000 a month, your landlord's not going to approve your application because they want you to be making a third of what the rent is, which means $3,000. So it was barrier after barrier after barrier. And while we've had some successes, you know, it's just this call to do more. It's the call to figure it out deeper. So what we did a few years ago is we came up with what we call our Housing Opportunities Program. So what we did was we reached out to people in our networks and said, hey, we want to offer a housing voucher to people and help them get connected to housing, offer this comprehensive case management to kind of address whatever the barrier is. And so we've had some success. It's been, we piloted, perfect timing, right? March of 2020 was when we were ready to launch. So you know, it was a little bit complicated for other factors, and it was complicated for all the other housing factors, but we've learned a lot. We've had to date, so it's been almost 3 years, and we've had to date 4 different participants of the program. And, you know, I think there's been some successes and some things we didn't anticipate. So that's kind of one way that we're trying to address housing while also exploring how to get into housing in a deeper level. So what we're learning is that that's going to take a lot of funding. It's going to take a lot of a lot more collaboration with city and state efforts, getting more involved with HUD programming, the COC. So we're concurrently exploring all of those routes while also trying to still figure out this Housing Opportunities Program and launching people into success through that. So that's a little bit about how we've addressed housing. I'd like to just clarify, like, we are not a housing provider, so at the moment, you know, we're not receiving any sort of vouchers or state funding for this kind of stuff, although we're exploring it. So it's really just something that, like, as a social service center, it's something our participants feel and experience deeply every day, and we're trying to figure out how to come up with a solution. So those have been kind of a short summary of our history and our efforts over the years in terms of housing and where we're hoping to go going forward. Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you, Teresa. And we're going to keep going. We're going to hold questions until we're done with the presentation. So just make a little mental note or jot down your question, and then we'll have some time for clarifying questions afterwards. Next, Amy, tell us more about your organization and the work that you're doing in housing as well.
Great. So I have a few slides, but just to outline how we're currently tackling this challenge around housing. The key challenges that we're trying to address, and this is through our member organizations, is vacant lots. So throughout the city of Chicago, it's estimated that there's 10,000 city-owned vacant lots. So that's just city-owned vacant lots. Some are also privately owned. So that's one challenge that we're seeing, especially throughout the south and west side neighborhoods of Chicago where our members are. The second, which sounds like you've all been learning about in your previous session, is the racial wealth gap and the inequities that have been created historically through the racial covenants that were in place here in Chicago and throughout the country, but that has also led to inequities in generational wealth, and especially the rates of home ownership among Black families, which has been the largest wealth generation, one of the wealth generation avenues in this country. And then the third is that there's not enough quality, affordable housing, especially to enter the housing market. That kind of starter home, we have not been building the starter homes as we were in the late 70s. One stat recently I found was that from 1976 to 1979, our country, we were building the entry-level housing, or workforce housing might be another way to think about it, at the rate of 418,000 homes a year. And in 2020, it was estimated that we're only generating 65,000. So that generation of new housing entering the market that people can enter into affordably, that has steeply declined. And then what we've seen here in Chicago, many of our members have been doing a lot of good work, and like many of the organizations up here, creating affordable housing and even creating single-family home ownership. But that oftentimes those efforts are spread thinly and generally, and not in a strategic way and at scale where it adds up to where we can mark and point to a whole-scale improvement in particular areas. And so United Power led an effort to build single-family homes. We built 100 single-family Ezra homes in North Lawndale in the late 90s into the early 2000s, and it was only 100 homes. And now today that neighborhood still has 3,000 vacant lots. So we need to, our focus is really trying to tackle this problem. We'll go to the next slide, and I'll say a bit about how we're doing that. So as I mentioned, we're not a housing organization. Our expertise is in building long-term, sustainable people power that is rooted in a broad base of institutions and that is tackling common challenges that we identify among our member organizations. So first and foremost, it starts with people and institutions and having that local knowledge of what's the common challenge, who's in the institutions, and what are people facing. Then the second thing is that we have to build organized people power through those institutions for the long haul, and that we have to use that power to produce results, something tangible that we can see, where we could walk around a neighborhood and we can take you to the 100 Ezra homes, or say this particular group got access to healthcare because of the power that we've leveraged. This map just reflects some of where our member organizations are, and we have 4 affiliates here in Illinois, in Lake, DuPage, and Kane counties, and we're also part of a national network of organizations, of affiliated organizations called the Industrial Areas Foundation. It's the oldest and largest network of its kind nationally that has about 60 similar organizations throughout the country. So we're part of a broader tradition and practice of tackling challenges in this manner. So what does that look like here in reality, and how have we leveraged that? So if we could go to the next slide. This is just from a recent action. I just found out that you joined us for this action. It was great. But this was an event we had at the House of Hope in July, organizing our people power. We had about 1,500 people there. And if we could go to the next slide. You know, we're organizing and aiming that people power towards public officials. So there's a number of public officials up on the stage. both Democrat and Republican, so I should mention we're fiercely nonpartisan, but we aim at both the public and private sector to engage them with organized people power to have an impact. So if we could go to the next slide, one example of how we've tackled this is the foreclosures initiated in one particular neighborhood on the southwest side of Chicago between 2011 and 2013. This is the Chicago Lawn neighborhood, where our member organization, the Southwest Organizing Project, is, and they organize. So they were tackling this challenge. They were on the ground addressing it, and they really developed a strategy to keep 600 families in this neighborhood in their homes. If we could go to the next slide. But in the wake of this, even though they were able to keep 600 families in their home, there were still vacant properties, as you can imagine, in the wake of this. And so SWAP started to develop, organize their people power to address a solution for this with United Power. Again, we're Cook County-wide. So together we worked on an effort called Reclaiming Southwest Chicago. We started in a 20-block area. So in this 20-block area, the red dots you see were the vacant properties at the start. Now today, there's only a handful. It's about 8 vacant properties. And what we did was strategically organize money to, at scale, invest in purchasing the vacant properties, rehabbing them, and selling them. There are some rental units that were part of this effort as well. So in a 20-block area, it was able to have an impact. The local schools improved, and the crime rate went down by 60%. The violent crime rate went down by about 60% in this particular area. So this is just a small-scale example. We saw that map earlier. There was a lot bigger area. So this is a small-scale example that leads to the work that we're doing now. So if we could go to the next slide. Our current strategy, the photo on the right is another example of our organized people power. This was shortly after this was in September of 2019, back when you could pack a bunch of people in a room and be face-to-face. We had a wall-to-wall action with newly elected Mayor Lightfoot, where we first laid out our vision, which is to build 2,000 to 3,000, we're being a little ambitious there, 2,000 to 3,000 single-family affordable homes on the south and west sides of the city. And so to date, the way that we're doing that is we're organizing our people power through our institutions, and we've leveraged first a pot of money that is primarily from the private sector, from philanthropy and some financial institutions. That's a revolving loan fund to build the homes that the members of United Power control. And so our goal is to raise $25 million to build 100 homes at a time. To date, we've leveraged $12.25 million in commitments. Then we need the land to prepare where we want to do something about the city-owned vacant land. So we have a commitment currently from the mayor for a first phase of 250 in North Lawndale, the neighborhood where we're starting. The first 100 have been committed, and just yesterday in 38-degree weather, 54 people from United Power gathered on one of the lots to pray over the land and bless the land as we start the first 14 homes. Yeah, it's exciting, but 14 compared to where we want to get to, there's a big gap there. So we've got a lot of work ahead, but we decided it was worth marking the start. And then finally, we have $10 million committed from the state, which will be used as subsidy to make those homes affordable. So that's our current, where we're at. We have a long way to go. But we have a great example. Some members from Fourth Presbyterian joined us in East Brooklyn, where we learned from our member organization out there, East Brooklyn Congregations, that has been at this for 40 years. And today, they currently have created 4,000 single-family homes in one particular neighborhood. It's generated an estimated $1.5 billion worth of wealth and equity for the families who have purchased those homes. And so we feel confident we can get there. We know it won't be easy, and we know it won't be happen overnight, but we feel hopeful that we can start to tackle this challenge together. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. And Jennifer, tell us more about the work of Habitat Chicago in housing inequality mitigation.
Do you have the slide?
Oh, sure. Yep. I will put that up for you.
To put this in a little bit of context, Amy kind of queued up our work in a really incredible way. So I'm excited to follow you because I think I can share a little bit about how we're approaching our work in that very strategic, focused effort that matters so much. Habitat, has been in Chicago since the mid-1980s and has done a number of amazing projects, but has done a lot of scattered site work. And I started at Habitat Chicago in 2011, and we were given a piece of property with 16 lots in the West Pullman neighborhood on the far south side of Chicago. And we looked at those 16 lots all on one block. They were all vacant on one block, and we started to ask ourselves a question of, are we going to be about this one block, or should we be thinking about our work for the wider neighborhood? And so we went on a little bit of a learning journey and met with local residents and community organizations and interested partners in that community to say, just 16 houses, or do we think more broadly? And it was through those conversations that we committed to the larger strategy around neighborhood health. We didn't call it that at the time. We've been learning along the way, but we really decided at that point that our job was to focus in neighborhoods to increase our impact and not try to scatter ourselves all over the city of Chicago. The city is large. We want to make sure whatever we're doing, we're making maximum impact in the communities that we serve. So you'll see on the slide here, this is a bit of a graphic that we're hoping will help tell a little bit of our story of our work. Across the top, you'll see 3 neighborhoods, very lightly shaded in gray, West Pullman, Greater Grand Crossing, and Austin. So we've been at West Pullman since 2011 and actively partnered up there for many years now, and we continue that effort. We actually have still quite a bit of land. We've got a parcel for 20 townhomes that we're currently getting ready to do a planned development on, and we've already built over 38 homes in that neighborhood specifically. So that's an area that we are firmly, long time committed to. In 2016, we did some exploration, decided to expand to Greater Grand Crossing. It took us a long time to get land, but we started building there last year. And we've got now about 4 homes that have been under construction, 2 completed, and another 17 lots that we just acquired recently. So just, again, really focusing our efforts in Greater Grand Crossing and going for large-scale acquisition of property so we can be thinking about larger impact. And then the third neighborhood, Austin, came to us, folks in Austin came to us right before the pandemic and invited us into the neighborhood because they would like to increase home ownership. And we were not looking for another neighborhood. But the more we met with them and heard their compelling story and their commitment to the Austin neighborhood, we thought it makes a lot of sense for us to shift our focus around coalition work and join into existing coalitions. And so we were going to get going with Austin, and then the pandemic came and everything just slowed down. So we're actually now re-engaging with Austin in evaluating parcels and starting to talk to the coalition that's there about how we do our work. Now, those are the neighborhoods that we're in. But when we think about neighborhoods, the top band on this half semicircle really are the things we think about around healthy neighborhood. We all know what a healthy neighborhood looks like. Have decent housing, has access to amenities, safety, transportation, education, all of these things matter. The realm that we are living in is housing, and so that's our focus, is that center at the top is housing. But we're looking at how our work can also be impactful of the other areas, or who else who we can partner up in those communities that are tackling those other areas, because Habitat's not going to be able to tackle everything. We're going to focus on housing. However, we can align ourselves with organizations and entities and coalitions that are tackling the other areas of work. So since we've even started in West Pullman, there's now a Far South Chicago coalition, and they are focused on a lot of different areas, including housing, but we are part of their coalition now. So again, more of us coming together around greater impact and focus together. When we think about our work, there's this little band in the middle there that has 4 areas. And so when we think about designing all of our programs and the work that we're doing, we think about outcomes. So we want to stabilize the market. we want to improve physical conditions, we want to increase social cohesion, and we want to improve image. And so we think about everything we do through the lens of those 4 outcomes. So all the programs we design and work on are focused on those. So our affordable homeownership program is the one that most folks know us for. It's the biggest program. It's paired up with our construction focus, our construction team, and together we are creating affordable homeownership opportunities, which then are focused on market outcomes, right? Very focused on market outcomes. But it also impacts image. We had a neighbor walk by our West Pullman development several years ago, and he said, this was such an image statement to me, he said, "Nothing new is ever built here." And then he paused, and he said, "This is great." And so in that statement was a shift in image of somebody saying, I see change going on here, and I see our neighborhood matters. And so image matters not only on the inside in terms of how we think about our own neighborhoods, it also matters on the outside. And so as we invite people to come to the neighborhoods to help build in the communities that we're building in, we're trying to also impact their image of the neighborhood and invite them to rethink how we think of the neighborhoods that we're building in. So how do we change the image of neighborhood? Social cohesion and physical improvements we've organized around what we call our Neighborhood Grants Program, which provides small grants to neighbors, block clubs, churches, groups that want to come together around bringing people together and improving the physical aspects of their neighborhood. We don't decide what those projects look like. That is not for us to do. It is completely up to the neighbors to decide what do we want to do, what's going to matter to us, to our neighborhood, to our community, and then our job is to provide small grants to those programs, to those folks. So those different programs are all focused on those 4 areas, and we know there's so many other things to tackle. One of the things we're hoping to get on, we got planned for this year, is to start tackling home preservation. We have a lot of existing homes where families are just one bad thing happening in their home, and they might not be able to live there anymore. And so if we can tackle home preservation and helping people stay safely in their homes, it not only impacts the homeowner that's living there, it potentially impacts the possibility for additional generational wealth. Because if that home becomes vacant, the ability to bring it back is much harder. So if we can keep people in their homes safely, securely, stabilize them, that would be a great win for us in terms of thinking about our overall neighborhood focus. So that's just a little bit about Habitat and how we think about our work, and we think about it overall through this lens of neighborhood health, and all of our focus is around what we can do to ensure we're thinking on those 4 areas that I just talked through. So it's a little bit about Habitat Chicago.
Thank you, Jen. And Cheryl, tell us a little bit about the work of Lincoln Park Community Services and what you're doing in the area of housing.
All right. Well, I love talking about Lincoln Park Community Services. It came together over 38 years ago with 4 faith communities, individuals who knew that there was a great problem with homelessness in Chicago. And those 4 faith communities did something about it. They didn't just sit back and talk about it. They stood up and they said, if no one else is going to do something, we're going to do something. And so they came together. The shelter at first was seasonal. It was an emergency overnight shelter, completely run by volunteers for years and years and years. And we happen to have 2 of them right here, Jeff Doan and Gretchen Van Atta, who were part of those congregations over the years. They took on leadership inside the organization, but they also served as community ambassadors, making sure that people knew that there was a place that individuals could come who were experiencing homelessness, but also talking to others in the community about what could be done. So here we are 38 years later, and we still have a significant problem with homelessness in this community. And so while we have a professional staff on board now, we still have a great number of volunteers who assist us with everything from meal preparation to coming in and making sure that the individuals that we are serving have the support that they need. It's great to have a home. It is. The work that you all are doing is incredible. But if I don't know anything about home ownership, if I've never had a job, if I have mental health issues, if I don't know how to manage a checkbook, the longevity for me in one of your establishments is going to be short. And so at Lincoln Park Community Services, we stabilize individuals who come to us, and we stabilize those individuals who we find. You know, there are a lot of barriers that you mentioned to getting people housed. If I don't have identification, I don't have a birth certificate, I can't produce a way for people to know who I am, I can't get a place to stay. If I have experienced substance use and I'm still having issues, or I have health problems, or all of the things that can derail someone from being stable, that's what we help provide. Now, we have 2 sites. One is in Lincoln Park, and the other one is in Old Town. Our original site is still in the lower level of Lincoln Park Presbyterian Church. We have interim housing there where we have 35 beds. At the Sedgwick location, we have 48 beds. That's our newer location that we opened up in October of 2019, and then of course we all know what happened 6 months later. And we also have 20 units on that campus of permanent supported housing for individuals who have been stabilized and can now live on their own. But they're just steps away from support if they need it. If they need food, if they need counseling support or case management, our team is right there. In addition, we have 17 scattered sites for housing of individuals who live independently. They are leasing from landlords, or they have partnered up and they have roommates in some of the homes that are out there. That's a baseline of services that we provide. One of the other things that we did, I've only been with Lincoln Park, even though I left my job on the Hill in Washington, D.C., I came here to start a youth shelter, which is also now has another large location. But to be able to help individuals who are experiencing homelessness, it requires a lot of resources. Not only manpower, but financial resources as well. So in the stabilization process, we try to make sure that all of the basic needs are met. So people don't have to think about, what am I going to eat? Where am I going to stay tonight? That's taken off the table, so that we can focus on some of the things that present greater challenges for stability and long-term housing. When I came to Lincoln Park about 18 months or so ago, we had served the prior year 438 people. In the next 12 months, we served over 2,200 individuals. And we were able to do that and serve more because we increased our drop-in services. So even though we didn't have a bed for you to sleep in, you could still come and access food. You could still get case management services. You could still apply for jobs. You could still get that one-on-one coaching that many people need until possibly a bed opened up. We also started an outreach program. All of the encampments that you see around town with tents or people standing on the corners, we took our services to the streets. So now we are able to get people information for additional resources in the community. We bring them food, we bring hot beverages, but we also talk to them about shelter life. And many of them have never been in a shelter before, but they don't want to come. They've heard about a shelter. They may not want to follow any of the rules that we have. They may have had a bad experience someplace at another shelter, or they're basing it upon another person's story about what happened to them. But we know We see the statistics. If we can get you into the shelter and begin providing those type of services, you're going to have greater success at being housed. Our highest number of getting people placed before in permanent housing was 48. Last year, we did 96. That is, we had 96 graduates who are now living independently. The people that were before them, 98% of the people who came through our program and services are still housed 2 years later. So it's one thing to talk about what we're doing now and to say, oh yeah, we've had some success with giving people meals and those sorts of things. Where we will really understand how successful we have been is how long we're able to keep individuals housed, that we have helped provide resources. The community has been incredible in terms of coming together. You know, when I hear about new organizations wanting to come forward, I say, stop, don't do it. Please collaborate with another organization that's doing some of the work. We are greater in mass than we are with thousands of small organizations who are trying to take giant bites out of the elephant. And the more that we are able to collaborate, the more that we're going to be able to get done here in the city. And so we've had some tremendous partners, including the city of Chicago. We have federal programming now where we are recipient of HUD dollars for our permanent supportive housing, but they're able to invest because they are seeing the results that the organization has been getting for 38 years. And all we're trying to do now is help more people who are experiencing homelessness so that we can take advantage of Habitat for Humanity, and so we can get out there and do some of the advocacy work. You talk about the empty lots. Chicago has over 30,000 empty buildings that are already in existence that if we could utilize them and support individuals who are experiencing housing issues, we could make a tremendous impact. So the city, because I have a very big mouth, I can't say that it is exclusively because of me, but it wasn't happening prior to us having a conversation, me and along with a lot of other service providers. What can we do with these buildings that are empty? There are places that people don't want a homeless shelter. And we fight this every single day. We have the NIMBYs that are out there that say, oh, yeah, we'll help, but not in my backyard. That's happening all the time. And it could change here in Chicago just like it has in other communities. But it's going to take the political will for us to do something about it. And let me tell you how I know it can happen here. During COVID, we got everybody who was experiencing homelessness on the street who wanted to get into a place, we got them into a place. The city opened up buildings, they opened up old hotels, they opened up old hospitals. That was the will. So what does it mean when we think about trying to do that permanently? Those buildings are out there. We could take them over. The city isn't a service provider in the sense of taking care of homelessness like Lincoln Park and many other organizations. They can provide the funding. That's all we need, is the funding and the real estate. We can get the people who are willing to do this work to take care of it. When I hear on a call that we have over 1,000 places, 1,000 good units for people to go, and there's a bottleneck of trying to get people in. Housing units are available, but the paperwork and the bureaucracy that is out there limits the number of people who can get housing just like that. And that's a tough thing to hear day in and day out. when we know that there are people living on the streets. And don't forget about inclement weather. Last year, we opened our doors to bring people in who were experiencing homelessness during brutal temperatures. 20 people a night. We took a room like this and we converted it. The city called or put out a call to shelters asking for a couple of beds, and we said, wait a minute, we have this room that we're not using overnight. We already have overnight staff. If you could get us some money for food, we got you taken care of. We put 20 cots out every night. We made sure people had a meal, they had a warm shower, they had a bed inside and not outside in the elements. When they got up in the morning, they were able to have a hot breakfast, and we sent them away with a bag lunch. You know, during the day, sometimes individuals can make their way. A library may be open, a coffee shop. I get a chance to walk around inside of a department store. I'm out of the elements. But when those things shut down overnight, there's no place for me to go and get warmth or any type of sustenance. So that's a little bit of the work that we do. And I am hopeful that instead of our numbers increasing, that at some point we're able to put ourselves out of business where we don't need the homeless shelters, that we're able to have people who can go right into your programs because they have a job, there's affordable housing, and they can afford to be there. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. So just wonderful presentations, each of you doing really powerful work on our behalf as a larger community. So what I'd like to do now is to open up the floor for some questions, because I'm sure you all are chomping at the bit to do so. And so if you could raise your hand and then introduce yourself, say your name to our panelists up here, and then direct your questions. Fred.
Cheryl, I think I've got one of your three numbers figured out, but can you tell me what the other two are?
Yes, I certainly can. So the 1,619, I didn't say it as a year because I didn't want you to think.
Oh, Cheryl, I'll give you this too.
But that is the year that some of the first slaves were brought over. And so a lot of things that have happened since that time that have created a situation where just because there's a feeling that people of color are less than, and it started then. And in some places, that mentality still exists. The 206 number is the amount of times between the $1 million wealth that we have in part of Cook County to the minus $1,500. It's 206 times the number in terms of poverty. That wealth amount, minus $1,500 to $1 million net worth. And the one is what you and I can do. One person can make a difference. Getting out there, if I get 2 people and you get 2 people, now we have 5 people working together, maybe 6. One person can make a difference. If you think about all of the people that people have followed and people have taken up the charge, it's been one individual that can do something. And I know what the power of one can do. And we see it happening here in Chicago every single day. It's just the will. Thank you. I guess we can keep this.
Other questions?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm Dr. June Johnson. I don't live in Illinois. I live in Indiana, and I'm a guest here because I heard about this panel. First of all, what is considered affordable housing? Is there a number, a monthly payment? I hear that all the time, but give me a number.
I'll put it in a little context. I know within Habitat and a lot of, when you just think about just generally around of what's affordable, it's that you shouldn't be paying more than 30% of your monthly income towards housing. That's typically the common way of thinking about what's affordable. Obviously, if you have no income coming in or very little income, the affordability is going to be a completely different factor. But generally, for affordable rental, affordable home ownership, it's that no more than 30% of your monthly income goes towards housing.
And there are some programs out there where individuals, if we could find a place for someone to go, which is like our scattered site housing right now, it is about 20% of your income. In some places, it's about 10%. So if you're making $1,000, your landlord accepts $100, but then the rest of that money is picked up like by HUD or some other programs. So it's also affordable on a sliding scale. And we've had people who have lost their jobs who have been in those programs. If you have zero income, then you don't pay anything. But if you're part of the program, there's a requirement that you do have some sort of income.
My name is Linda Uzerall. I just have been overwhelmed by last week and this week's presentations. They're just wonderful. And so I wanted to ask a favor of you, Joe. I would really like to have these presentations sent out to those of us who registered. I think I sent my email in, and especially last week, we really couldn't see the presentations very well, so I'd love to have those presentations. And also, I would like to suggest that the participants bring pamphlets or whatever about contributing to those organizations, because I've been a longtime contributor to Habitat for Humanity, but the other organizations, frankly, are all organizations that were totally unknown to me. So that's another just suggestion.
Thank you. Two great suggestions, and we'll get together and talk with Fred, Alan, and Stephanie, and we'll work on getting resources for everyone who registered.
Hi, my name is Cynthia Johnson. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Adult Education Committee. My question is for Jennifer. You mentioned the importance of coalitions and partnerships and focus on outcomes of your work. It's my understanding a lot of the work done for Habitat is done by volunteers. But for the work that's done by non-volunteers, like construction and so forth, is it part of your strategy to employ or seek out diverse-owned firms to be contributors and collaborators on the projects in these communities?
It's a great question. So I'm going to give you just a really brief overview of how our construction our operating model in construction at Habitat here in Chicago. So we have a small but mighty construction team that's of staff and AmeriCorps. And when I say small but mighty, I'm like 10 people, so very small. We round out them with subcontractors, and we are always looking to hire, and we do hire minority contractors, specifically because we want to be supporting folks locally. And so we round out our buildings, so you think all the mechanical stuff, you think of all of the HVAC, roofing, all of that work. We're hiring subcontractors to do that. The day in and day out of building is led by our small but mighty construction staff with volunteers. And so we're bringing in people year round for Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays building those houses. So what we don't have, and this is something that continues to come up, and we're think we're going to actually turn the tide on it this year is a workforce development program. One of the things that we know is we want to be able to provide more jobs to folks, but it's a very small group of construction professionals who want to train volunteers, and we love our volunteers, but it's when you're building a house, you're not only building the house, you're also with us, you're building a house, and you're also teaching other people to build a house. And so if we could build out a workforce development program that would provide training and to folks in the community around housing, construction, they're not only could they stay with us, they could also go out and find jobs in the larger construction market. And I gotta tell you, if you get a job in the construction market, you have a job for life, right? So, so that's something that we're in conversations with a couple of folks right now about building that out. We've had various attempts in the past, but most of the time, it's like, here, we want you train people how to build, on building a house and on workforce level, and we just don't have the trainers to do that. But we've got some great folks we're talking to now that are going to help us build a program and help provide the trainers for it. So, I don't know, does that answer your question? Okay, yeah, we're very excited about the possibility there.
Hi, my name's Annette, and I've done a lot of social work in the city and in different places, not pretty places, okay? And two things. First thing, I wanted to respond to what you said about workers. A lot of people aren't teachers, number one, and number two, if you're not good with your hands, you're really not good with your hands. So that is a problem in all construction. I know that from my dad. And then the second thing is, I don't know how you triage this, but you just don't move people into a building and everybody's really happy and gets along. There are a lot of crises, really from the start, unless you have an intake program that's sealed in gold. There are problems. And do you have a workforce or a crisis team that helps them once they get there? Does that make sense to you?
Is that for me, or is that for?
I don't know who does this on the group level.
We always have a crisis team. And so it's one of the things that is so important. First of all, thank you for your work as a social worker. We have not enough of you. If you're interested in coming over to volunteer, we will also take you. But it's important because of all of the things that have happened to individuals historically. You know, people, if you've experienced trauma, experienced homelessness, you've experienced trauma in some way. And you never know, even though you might get a home, when that trauma may resurface, if there are issues with a neighbor potentially and those sorts of things, or even how to manage being on your own. So I'll just tell you a quick story. You know, we had someone who burned down a house, not from Lincoln Park, but we all know this story because they didn't know how to use a microwave, okay? They put something in the microwave, stepped away from it, probably pushed the wrong buttons, the house burned down. We had someone who put dishwashing liquid, like liquid, in a dishwasher. When we're talking about basic skills, then on the other end of the spectrum, the crisis, we do have people that are there and available. Even after you've graduated from Lincoln Park Community Services, we will still support you if you need it. We have a graduate council who's very active, of people who have come through Lincoln Park and have graduated. So their support as well.
I have two questions for you all to kind of close out our time together. Unless, looks like you have questions. Oh, thank you. And this kind of dovetails on what you just mentioned, Cheryl, and that is we often talk about all the adjustments, particularly those on the end of the spectrum of housing who need permanent supportive housing, need in order to succeed in their new homes. But what about the neighborhoods and the other neighbors, the folks who are already there? You talked a little bit about NIMBY earlier, and I'm wondering, how do each of you tackle that issue of the not in my backyard for all the various projects that you might be working on? And then lastly, I wanted to ask about policy. So we've talked a lot about these inequalities. You've given us a lot of important stats about vacant lots and vacant buildings. What do we need to be doing policy-wise to further close the gap and alleviate this housing crisis? And I'll just kind of go down the line, and you all can respond as you would like.
Oh, okay. I'll go first. Again, I'm going to speak to this kind of on a small scale based on our program, but when we've had a few of our voucher recipients that they're ready, we accept them into the program, they're ready to start applying, it's to speak to the not in my backyard, when you show up and your face has tattoos on it or you have a teardrop on your cheek, there's a profiling that takes place. So denial, denial, denial on your application. So what we have had to do is kind of look at that, see how that's presenting, and then, take a larger step of saying, like, we're backing this person. We're going to support them. Here's our program. So it's a little bit of that psychoeducation piece. Like, as a program, we believe housing is a human right. And we have to really kind of draw on our psychoeducation and advocacy skills there to create a buy-in that this person deserves to live here, that this person deserves to be here, that we're going to support them in their success, and honor and respect that this is your property and we want to take care of it. So there's a lot of those little challenges that come up when we're trying to get somebody housed in a neighborhood that they want to live in. And then what was the second question, Joe? Policy, yeah. So I think, the city likes to come in and make some changes. So paying attention to the affordable housing spaces in our community. An example of this for us is the Lawson House up the street, 30 West Chicago. That was where a lot of our participants lived. And a few years ago, they kind of moved everybody out. They're revamping, renovating. What we're keeping our eyes on are people going to be welcomed back in? Is it still going to be affordable? So, I think what we've seen over the years is a closure of SROs, which stands for single room occupancies. These are kind of what you spoke to, affordable housing. So if you're on a fixed income, this is a housing space that you can afford based on a fixed income. What's happened is that they've closed. So keeping an eye on those buildings and properties and making sure that we're, using our skills to advocate with aldermen and the political machine that is housing in Chicago. So that's what I have to offer.
Yeah, thank you. So on the NIMBY piece, I just affirm what Cheryl lifted up, that there's always NIMBYs, and we've experienced that in the 4-county region where we've worked. That has been the case, even in places. So United Power was part of an effort in Oak Park, and they proposed an affordable housing development, a nice, liberal bastion of Oak Park, and there was NIMBY opposition. It's everywhere, so our focus has been on, just as much as there's NIMBYs, there's also the YIMBYs. There are people who want to support that. And so we've focused on organizing through institutions people that are in support of that. So in Oak Park, when this effort was proposed, 7 of our member organizations there came together and said, we want to do something about this, and how could we address this? And so we organized a campaign. It was over the course of, roughly 2 years that this was under consideration in the local government there. And so when, they had the local hearing, there were hundreds of people that came out in opposition. And then the next week, when they had another hearing, we made sure there were 300 people there that came out in support. And over the years throughout the counties, so eventually, let me finish the story there. we right before there was also a local election coming up, so we held a forum in the basement of Ascension Catholic Church, had 200 people out from the 7-member institutions, the 4 candidates that were up for election, and we asked them just one question: will you support the Grove Apartments if you're elected? And they all said yes, and then eventually they had the vote in the city council, and it passed with, I think, close to unanimous support. So we made sure that that got built, and then we had to do the work to make sure at the county level and the state level the funding came through to actually get it built. So it takes a long time to get permanent supportive housing built. It's not for the weak or people that want to see something overnight. And then, we throughout the 4 county areas, we've organized support and even tried to get out ahead of it. So most recently in Kane County, where the Larkin Center is a place in Elgin, our organization out there organized local support ahead of this even being proposed in the local government, and that got built and had lots of support from the start. So we tried to get ahead of making sure that the YIMBY support can be there as well, and in considering these things. And then on the policy side, I won't say too much about that, other than I think that as we look at affordable housing policy in general throughout our country, a lot of it is focused around rental. And I think that's, we obviously think that's very important and that's a crucial need. I think there is room to look at how does affordable housing policy address single family home ownership as well, because I mentioned the big gap in entry level home ownership as well. So I think that's another piece that could be thought about or considered.
So again, I'm glad I'm following Amy, because I just want to start with the policy question first. We've been investing in affordable rental as a nation for years and years and years with the low-income housing tax credit program. There is no similar program on the homeownership front. There's a proposal that's underway. It's got bipartisan support to create the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act, which would allow for the creation of a tax credit program, which would then help to create affordable homeownership opportunities, close the gap between the appraised value and the cost to build. That is a policy, like if we could get that passed on a policy level, that would make a huge investment in homeownership for the first time in decades and decades. As a nation, we invested in affordable homeownership from the 1940s all the way into the 70s, and then we stopped. And we haven't revisited that as a nation. And so we have to be pushing on homeownership. And we have to be pushing on funding for those that are not housed. And we have to be pushing on funding for affordable rental. But homeownership has not been a priority for decades. And so we have an opportunity. So my request to people is, talk to your congressman, talk to your senator, be pushing this with them, that this matters, that affordable housing matters, affordable homeownership matters. We need to make investments in homeownership. When you make an investment in homeownership, you are also making an investment in the creation of jobs. There's so many things that flow out from that are lifting all boats when you make these investments. So, and we lost a lot of opportunity when the major infrastructure bill did not get passed through, that Biden was, sorry to be political for a second, we lost a major opportunity because there was a major push towards the creation of more homes in the United States, major funding for moving the dial on that. So that's now been backburnered for a while on the creation of more housing, but let's push it forward again. I mean, we should keep being a force to say we need to invest in more housing for everyone in these United States. Local matters too, so talk to your alderman, talk to your local elected officials, but also talk to your federal elected officials as well, because housing needs to stay at the forefront. Going back to the neighborhood piece, when we're going in and we're starting a new development, or we're starting to build on a new street, or we're starting to build in a different part of a neighborhood, we actually go in advance and try to get to know the neighbors. Neighbor relations matter. And so we go in, we introduce ourselves, we have the Neighborhood Grants Program, which is one of the ways in which we try to get in front of folks and say, we've got this opportunity, we'd like to introduce ourselves, and if you're interested in one of these grants, here's how this works. Again, we're for the entire neighborhood, not just parts of the neighborhood, and so we feel it's our job to be out in front and meeting neighbors, and ultimately, because our future homeowners will be part of that neighborhood, we want them to be welcomed by the other neighbors and seen as, we're excited to have you come into our neighborhood. Thank you for joining us. And if we come in and just look like we're bringing in a bunch of outsiders, that's not going to help. Like, we need to make sure that we're coming in this and managing neighbor relations and taking that making that a priority. It's incredibly important to making sure that we're supporting the longtime residents as well as the homeowners that are coming in and buying the homes that we're building. I think that's it.
All right. So I think about how Chicago is set up now, and it really has had a lot to do with Chicago politics. This is an outsider saying this, but there's also some data that backs it up. And that is how districts were determined. We've all heard about the redlining, and you can see how neighborhoods are structured right now. And that is because aldermen had complete control about how to invest resources within their geographic territory. And so they could decide what social services were going to be where, what was going to be in a neighborhood, et cetera. And I guess within the last couple of years, aldermanic privilege has been snatched away in some regards. Not completely, but in the old way where they had complete control. So I do believe that there is hope, but it means that we have got to put pressure on our political leaders and vote for the people who are going to support your neighborhood initiatives and agenda. As far as the NIMBYism, we have formalized NIMBYs in our area, and they have formalized themselves. You mentioned Lawson House. That's where my youth shelter started before we built the new building. And so we don't know if we're going to be able to come back to that particular location. But for Lincoln Park, we have a group of neighbors who have not been happy that the shelter is there in Lincoln Park. They send me messages that are vile. They send me messages that are horrible, and they copy everyone from the mayor, alderman, and all the neighbors about any situation. Now, if you drive past this location, you won't even know that there's a shelter there, because we're under an agreement that came some time ago where we can't put a sign outside to say what services are offered. We can't offer meals to people because they said we don't want people coming up all times of day and night asking for meals. My hand gets a little, thank you. But that's even for the church. The church can't hand out meals. That's how powerful the group can be. And so what I have done is I try to encourage individuals. When I get those emails, I pick out names, like, come over to the shelter. It's not what you think. The people are not who you believe they are. There has been fear that has been stoked about people that are experiencing homelessness, that they're somehow going to do something to the neighbors. The truth of the matter is, it's homeless individuals who are often the victims. And so it is about providing education and making sure that people know what they're talking about. If you saw our guests walking down the street, you wouldn't know that they're homeless. They're clean, they're well shaven, their hair is groomed, they have makeup on, because 60% of them have a job and they're going to work. But they live at the shelter because they can't afford a place to live. But we're helping them build their incomes. So if we can continue educating and sharing the realities of what homelessness looks like, I think we can make a little bit of headway with those individuals who they're just fearful because everybody else is fearful, not because they've experienced anything from our community.
to our panel. It was excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you for your attention, and we'll see you next week.
Yep. Next week, it'll be in your hands. So we're going to invite those who are members of our congregation and active participants to have a hands-on conversation about what you've heard these past 2 weeks and what our role is and what our values are as Fourth Church as we approach the issue of housing inequality in Chicagoland. So next time it's you all on the stage, if you will. All right, let's give them a round of applause. Thank you all so much.